Two of the most common grebe species in North America are the Clark's grebe and the western grebe. These two birds are also some of the most difficult to identify from each other by birders and birdwatchers alike. Let's dive in. To start things off, we're going to have two adult birds side by side. Over here we have the western grebe, and over here we have the Clark's grebe. Now there's some key components to identifying these two bird species from each other. Starting with the western grebe, the dark cap that's on the top of its head extends all the way down below the eye. These two birds that you see here are in breeding plumage, so February to September. On the Clark's grebe, the white surrounds the eye and the cap stays above the eye the entire time. There's also a line that goes from the eye all the way to the beak of the Clark's grebe. Both birds have slightly different colored bills. In fact, the western grebe has a more olive and dimmer yellow bill, while the Clark's grebe has a very bright and vibrant yellow bill. This should not be the only indicator if you're identifying the birds in the field. Color can look very different in different lighting conditions, so make sure you're paying attention during this breeding season to the dark cap dropping below the eye or being above the eye. Western grebes have a much darker back than the Clark's grebe, while of course the Clark's grebe has a much lighter back than the western grebe. The Clark's grebe also has wider flanks than the western grebe. If you're looking at them directly behind them, they're looking away from you and you can only see the back of their neck. The western grebe has a lot more black on the back of its neck, while the Clark's grebe has a very thin line. In flight, you can also distinguish these birds from each other, although I don't think I've ever seen a Clark's or a western grebe flying. It's not something that you normally have to do, but to ID the two apart from each other while they're flying, the western grebe has a lot more dark on top of its wings and the Clark's grebe has a lot more white on top of its wings. So just remember, if you're looking at the two species from a long distance away, western grebes tend to be a lot darker than Clark's grebes. But again, you should be combining some of these different ID factors to come up with your final ID. So the hardest period to identify the two species from each other is actually during non-breeding season. This happens from September to February, so it is a good chunk of the time that you'll be seeing these birds out and about. During this time period, the black on the western grebe doesn't really drop as far as it normally does, so that's not always the best distinguishing factor between the two birds. You'll definitely want to combine that cap being dropped or raised with the flanks and the back of the bird. Again, western grebes are a lot darker and Clark's grebes are a lot wider, so pay attention to those two things when they're in their non-breeding plumage. Lastly, if you look at this video, this is a western grebe with actually a young western grebe. Now, young western grebes look a lot palish white overall, and they actually don't have that black cap that extends all the way down. So just make sure that you're looking at the surrounding birds when there's a young western grebe around so you can distinguish the two from each other and come up with the conclusion that, yeah, this is a western grebe, just a young one. Now there's also the possibility of a hybrid between the two birds. These birds are both known to hybridize, which does not make ID easier. Specifically during breeding season, this is the only time you can identify a hybrid. During non-breeding season, it's pretty much near impossible to identify the two apart from each other. If you think you have a hybrid, maybe leave a little question mark, a slash, rather than an actual hybrid during non-breeding season. During breeding season, you can actually tell the difference between the two birds. If they have an intermediate face pattern where it kind of is doing both things during the breeding season and their bill color is a little bit off either way, most likely you're dealing with a hybrid and you're good to mark that down on your list. Now these birds have extremely similar calls, so let me first play the call of the western grebe. And here's the call of the Clark's grebe. As you can see, they both sound near identical, but there is one slight difference. Western grebes typically give a 2-syllable queet, queet, while Clark's grebe give a single syllable queet. At the end of the day, this isn't a great way to identify the two birds from each other, so you should really rely on everything I've told you before this point. True to their name, western grebes hang out in the western United States. They can go as far inland as Michigan, but they are known to vagrate into the east as well. So if you see a grebe in the east, it is most likely a western grebe. However, they're much less likely to drop down south. They could very likely be regulars in Arizona and New Mexico as well. Clark's grebes, on the other hand, kind of have the exact same range as the western grebe, but they do not really vagrate into the east. In fact, when I was looking at eBird's maps, there's no reports of them on that eastern side of the United States past Michigan. So again, if you're seeing a grebe that looks like a western or a Clark's grebe out east, still make sure you ID it. but it's most likely a western grebe. Clark's grebes also drop down way more south than the western grebes do, but again, you should ID every bird anyways. Both birds actually have permanent non-moving populations in north central Mexico as well. Both the Clark's grebe and the western grebe are extremely awkward on land. In fact, they'll drag themselves out of the water on their bellies. I've been birding for years now, and I've never actually seen either of these species on land, so this is a very rare occurrence. They're almost always going to be in the water. Both species do a beautiful breeding display where they get up on their hind legs in the water, they raise their necks up, and then they run across the water super fast together in unison, doing like a really cool breeding dance. A lot of photographers come to take photos of this event that takes place every single year, and if you ever see it, you definitely want to just plop yourself down and enjoy the moment. There's not a lot of difference in regards to behavior, so in reality, you don't want to be relying on behavior as your identification factors. Just go back to the physical factors that we talked about, because otherwise they're exactly close to being the same. Now you have the baseline knowledge to be able to identify these two hard to differentiate species. Remember that the best way to learn bird ID is to get outside and practice. Soon you'll be a pro. Don't forget to check out my adventure channel where I take you birding with me on a weekly basis and go find some incredible birds. Thank you for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Broad-Eyed Birding Learn.